Have you ever wondered why some people, even with so little, seem to live with peace in their hearts, while others, surrounded by wealth, remain restless and unhappy? Across centuries, wise teachers have spoken of a gentle but unbreakable law that guides all lives, the law of cause and effect. In Buddhism, it is known as karmat, the truth that every action, every word, and even every quiet thought plants a seed in the garden of our destiny. Tonight, as you rest your mind and prepare for sleep, let us wander into a timeless story. A story where kindness is never lost, where generosity blooms like a hidden flower, and where greed, no matter how strong, fades like shadows in the night. Close your eyes, breathe softly, and let this tale of cause and effect guide you into dreams of peace. Long ago, before cities were filled with noise and before the world was ruled by haste, there was a time when people lived close to the earth and listened to the quiet rhythms of nature. In those days, wisdom was not written in books, but whispered in the winds, taught by the rivers, and mirrored in the changing seasons. Among the truths passed from one generation to another, none was more profound and yet more simple than the law of cause and effect. It was said that every action a person performed, no matter how small, was like dropping a pebble into a still pond. The ripples would spread outwards, unseen at first, but eventually touching distant shores. These ripples could be ripples of kindness and peace, or they could be ripples of harm and suffering. And so the elders taught, plant good seeds and good fruits will surely grow, whether today, tomorrow, or in some far-off season. Plant harmful seeds and sorrow will eventually return. As surely as night follows day in a small village nestled between gentle hills and quiet streams, there lived people who believed in this law. Their lives were simple, their homes built from wood and clay, and their days marked by the rising and setting sun. Yet even in this quiet place, human hearts revealed the wide spectrum of kindness and greed, of generosity and fear. Among the villagers there was a farmer, known not for riches or cleverness, but for the warmth of his smile and the steadiness of his hands. Each morning, before the first light touched the fields, he rose, gave thanks to the earth, and walked barefoot across the soil. He whispered to his crops as though they were friends, asking them to grow strong and nourish those who would eat. When a traveler passed through the village, dusty and weary, the farmer would stop his work, offer water, and share what little food he had. When a neighbor's child cried of hunger, he would give a portion of his grain without asking for anything in return. The villagers said he was poor, but the birds seemed to sing louder in his fields. And when he sat beneath the old banyan tree, even the shadows felt like comfort. Living next to this farmer was another man, one who owned larger lands and taller houses. He had inherited wealth from his ancestors, and he guarded it with a restless heart. He locked his barns each night with heavy chains, as though even the moon might steal from him. He spoke little to the poor, and when beggars came to his gate, he sent them away with harsh words. When he looked at his neighbor, the kind farmer, he felt only contempt. "What foolishness," he muttered, "to give away food when it could be stored. What weakness, to help strangers who will never repay you." He believed that strength lay in holding tightly to one's possessions. That generosity was nothing more than a path to loss. Yet despite his riches, his sleep was troubled, and his heart never knew rest. It is here that the quiet drama of karma began to unfold. The kind farmer, though never seeking recognition, created ripples with each gesture of kindness. The tired oxen he fed with leftover straw grew strong and plowed his field with patience. The thirsty traveler he once gave water to remembered his compassion and carried the story to another town. The poor family he helped spoke of his kindness as though it were light in a dark night. These were small seeds, invisible to the eye, yet in the vast soil of the universe they were sprouting silently. The greedy landowner, too, planted seeds each day, but his were seeds of distrust and hardness. When he shouted at his workers, they obeyed, but their loyalty withered. When he mocked the farmer for sharing, envy and bitterness took root in his heart. The universe does not judge with anger or mercy. It only reflects. And so the law of cause and effect, gentle yet unyielding, waited for its time as the seasons passed. The village shifted between times of plenty and times of struggle, as all places do. When the rains came, the fields turned green, and the farmer sang softly to his plants, grateful for every drop. He carried baskets of vegetables to the market, not to hoard but to share. At the end of the day, his profits were small, but his heart was light. When drought visited the land, and the earth cracked under the hot sun, the farmer tightened his belt and ate less so that his neighbors would not starve. He knew hunger, yet he also knew the quiet joy of seeing others survive because of his sacrifice. The landowner, in times of plenty, filled his barns until they overflowed, and then built new barns to hold more. In times of drought, he counted his sacks of grain each night and worried that others might steal from him. When hungry villagers begged for help, he turned them away, clutching his keys tighter. His barns were full, but his heart was hollow. One evening, as the sky turned gold and the first stars appeared, the farmer sat by his door with his wife and children. They spoke of the day, of the small joys of life, of the kindness they had received and the kindness they had given. The farmer's youngest child asked, "Father, why do you always give food to others, even when we have little?" The farmer looked at the child with gentle eyes and said, "My son, when we give, we do not lose. We plant seeds in the hearts of others, and those seeds will grow into forests of love. Perhaps one day, when you are lost or hungry, someone will remember and help you. But even if no one does, kindness itself is the harvest. It makes the heart rich even when the hands are empty." His wife smiled, and the children fell asleep with peace in their hearts. Not far away, in the large house with tall walls, the landowner paced restlessly. He had counted his coins 3 times, checked the locks on his barns, and yet could not calm his mind. He thought of thieves in the night, of drought destroying his fields, of illness taking his wealth. Though his house was filled with abundance, he felt only fear. He could not hear the crickets singing, nor see the beauty of the starlit sky. His heart was like a locked chest, heavy and lonely. This is how life unfolded. Day after day, like threads being woven into a tapestry, the farmer wove threads of compassion, patience, and joy. The landowner wove threads of fear, greed, and mistrust. Both men lived side by side, but their inner worlds were as distant as the earth and the sky. The villagers noticed. They said, "The farmer has little, yet he seems wealthy in spirit. The landowner has much, yet he seems poor in peace." And quietly, they began to respect one more than the other. Time is the truest witness of karma. It does not rush, it does not delay. The seeds of today may sleep for many years, but when the right season comes, they bloom without fail. The farmer's kindness was like water seeping deep into the soil, nourishing roots unseen. The landowner's greed was like salt scattered on the earth, invisible but slowly poisoning what should have grown. Neither man could escape what he himself had planted, and so the stage was set. though neither of them yet knew it. The world was quietly preparing to reveal the fruits of their choices. The rains would change, the winds would shift, and soon both men would face the harvest of their own making. For now, though, the stars shone equally over their homes. The moonlight touched both roofs, and the night whispered the same lullaby. The law of cause and effect was already at work, moving silently like the tide, waiting for the moment when the hidden seeds would finally rise to the surface and show their true blossoms. Morning in the village always arrived gently, not with the harsh clamor of machines or the restless hum of traffic, but with the slow lifting of mist from the fields and the first songs of the birds waking in the trees. The sun did not rush its ascent. It painted the sky in tender shades of pink and gold, as if to remind the world that each day was a gift. In a modest house at the edge of the rice fields, the farmer rose before the light had fully broken. He moved quietly so as not to disturb his sleeping children. His wife stirred softly, offering him a smile before closing her eyes again, trusting him to begin the day with the same steady rhythm he always carried. The farmer's mornings began not with thoughts of wealth or worry, but with gratitude. He would step outside, place his palms together, and bow gently toward the earth. He whispered words of thanks for the soil that gave food, for the rain that nourished the crops, and for the sun that would soon rise to warm the fields. Then, barefoot, he walked along the damp edges of his land, feeling the coolness of the earth under his feet. Some mornings he would stop to remove a stone that had rolled into the path of his oxen. Other times he would pause to brush dew from a fragile plant, speaking softly as though the crops could hear. In his heart, he believed they could. His oxen, old but faithful, knew his touch well. When he approached, they turned their heads, as if greeting an old friend. He never raised his voice at them, never used the whip with cruelty. Instead, he patted their flanks, fed them straws soaked in water, and whispered, "You work hard for me, and I will care for you as best I can." Some villagers laughed at this, saying animals did not understand human speech. But those same villagers noticed that his oxen worked longer and grew stronger than others, as if responding to the kindness that surrounded them. After tending to the animals, the farmer began the slow work of plowing or watering, depending on the season. His tools were simple, worn from use, yet they served faithfully in his hands. As he worked, he often hummed old songs his father had taught him, melodies that seemed to blend with the rustle of leaves and the calls of distant birds. He was never in a hurry. Each stroke of the hoe, each guiding of the plow, was done with presence. To him, farming was not merely labor for survival. It was a conversation with the earth, a partnership where patience and care bore fruit. Travelers often passed along the dusty road that ran near his fields. Merchants with heavy loads, monks on their long journeys, or poor wanderers searching for food and shelter would sometimes pause to rest beneath the shade of the banyan tree that marked the farmer's boundary. When he noticed them, he always left his work for a moment. He brought a clay pot of cool water, dipped from his well, and offered it with both hands. If he had bread or fruit, he shared it freely. Some travelers would bow deeply, thanking him with words of blessing. Others were too weary to speak, but their eyes shone with relief. For the farmer, this was enough. One afternoon, a young man staggered down the road, clearly hungry and weak. His clothes were torn, and his eyes seemed hollow. The farmer's wife, seeing him from the doorway, worried they did not have enough to spare. But the farmer smiled gently and said, "We will eat a little less tonight, and he will eat enough to live." He carried a bowl of rice, and some salted vegetables to the stranger, who ate slowly, tears mixing with each bite. Later, when the man had regained his strength, he explained that he had lost his family in a distant famine and was wandering in search of work. The farmer could not offer him riches, but he gave him a place to rest for several nights. And when the man left, he left with renewed hope. The children of the farmer watched this and learned, not through lectures but through example, that kindness was the most natural expression of a human heart. Though the farmer worked tirelessly, his family's life was not free of hardship. There were days when the rains came late and the crops drooped in thirst. There were nights when sickness visited their modest home, and his wife or children lay in bed with fever. Yet even in such times, the farmer did not let bitterness take root. He believed that suffering was part of the rhythm of life, like shadows that followed the light. When troubles came, he whispered to himself, "This too shall pass, just as storms give way to clear skies." His calmness steadied his family. His wife often said that his strength was not in his muscles, but in his heart, for he carried them through difficulties with patience instead of despair. The farmer's generosity extended beyond his own home. Once, when the village elders needed people to repair the irrigation canal that carried water to the fields, many complained they were too busy with their own farms. The farmer, though his fields also needed tending, joined without hesitation. He carried stones, dug trenches, and worked side by side with those who came. When asked why he gave time to communal work instead of focusing only on his own land, he replied, "If the canal dries, my fields will also wither. When we work for others, we also protect ourselves. The water does not choose one field alone. It nourishes all equally." His words spread quietly through the village, and in time more people joined the effort, inspired by his example. Children in the village loved to visit his home, for he always greeted them with a smile and often carved small toys from leftover wood. He showed them how to plant seeds in the soil and wait patiently for the first green shoots to appear. He taught them not by scolding, but by guiding their hands and praising their curiosity. Some children who had no fathers looked to him as a gentle figure of guidance. When one child accidentally broke a pot in his home, the boy cried in fear of punishment. But the farmer knelt down, wiped the tears, and said, "Do not be afraid. A pot can be replaced, but a good heart cannot. Be careful next time, and all will be well." Stories of his kindness began to spread beyond the village. Once, a monk traveling from a distant monastery stopped at his field. The farmer, seeing the monk's dust-covered feet, offered him water and bowed respectfully. The monk smiled and said, "You live by the Dharma without knowing you do." Each act of kindness is a prayer. Each gesture of generosity is a meditation. The farmer did not fully understand the monk's words, but they stayed in his heart, warming him whenever doubts arose. Despite his goodness, the farmer never thought of himself as special. When praised, he would laugh softly and say, "I am only doing what my heart tells me." We all depend on one another. Today I give. Tomorrow I may need to receive. Life is like the wheel of a cart, always turning. His humility made his kindness shine even more. Meanwhile, his greedy neighbor often looked across the boundary and scoffed. He saw the farmer sharing food, helping strangers, and giving time to others, and he shook his head in disbelief. "What foolishness," he thought. "He wastes his strength and his resources. When trouble comes, he will have nothing left, and then he will regret his softness." Yet the landowner never noticed the quiet joy in the farmer's family. the laughter of children, the trust of neighbors, and the peace that filled his evenings. He saw only material possessions, blind to the invisible wealth that grew around the farmer like an unseen treasure. Seasons passed in this way. The farmer continued his daily rhythm, rising before dawn, thanking the earth, tending his fields with care, and sharing whatever he could. His children grew in kindness, his wife found strength in his patience, and his neighbors trusted him deeply. The seeds he planted were not only in the soil but in the hearts of all who knew him. And though he did not seek it, the law of cause and effect was quietly recording each act, preparing a harvest that would one day return to him in ways beyond his imagination. For now, his days unfolded with simplicity. He lived without grandeur, without wealth, but with a heart at ease. His life was proof of an ancient truth, that happiness does not come from what one hoards, but from what one shares. His fields were not only fields of rice and grain, they were fields of compassion, fields of patience, fields of joy. And just as the crops swayed gently in the wind, nourished by sun and rain, so too did his life sway in harmony with the universe, rich not in possessions but in peace. In the same village where the kind farmer lived his humble and gentle life, there stood a house that seemed out of place. Its walls were taller than the others, its gates heavy with iron, and its barns rose above the roofs like towers of pride. Inside lived the landowner, a man known for his wealth, yet also for the hardness that lived in his eyes. Where the farmer's hands were worn with labor but soft with kindness, the landowner's hands were smooth, yet clenched as though always holding something tightly, afraid to let it go. He did not rise with gratitude, nor did he step into the fields to thank the soil. Instead, his mornings began with counting. He counted coins, he counted sacks of grain, he counted cattle as though their worth defined his own. Numbers filled his thoughts more than the rising sun or the song of the birds. To him, life was not a gift to be cherished, but a possession to be secured. When his workers arrived, they were met not with a smile, but with suspicion. He watched them as they labored, always fearing they might take a little for themselves. If they slowed in the heat, he scolded them. If they asked for an extra measure of rice, he refused with sharp words. To him, generosity was weakness, and trust was foolishness. Though his barns overflowed, he always feared emptiness. Though his fields were vast, he always felt they were too small. His heart was like a cup with a hole at the bottom, never filled no matter how much was poured in. The villagers spoke of him with unease. Some respected him for his wealth, but few truly admired him. Children were warned not to play near his walls, for he disliked noise and often chased them away. Beggars who came to his gate left with empty hands and heavy hearts. Merchants passing through knew he would bargain fiercely, squeezing every coin, caring little for their hardship. He was known as a man who always won in trade, but always lost in kindness. And so, though his house was large, it often stood silent, visited by few and warmed by little joy at night. When the village quieted and families gathered by the hearth to share stories and food, the landowner sat alone with his treasures. He lit oil lamps and opened his chests, letting the gold shine like captured sunlight. He ran his fingers through coins, stacked them into neat towers, then toppled them only to build them again. Yet no matter how high the stacks rose, they never brought him peace. Instead, he felt a gnawing fear that someone might break in and steal them, that floods might destroy his barns, or that misfortune might one day leave him with nothing. He locked his doors with heavy chains, checked them twice, then 3 times, yet still his heart was restless. His wealth was like a heavy blanket. In summer it gave no comfort, only suffocation. The contrast between him and the farmer next door was clear to all who watched. When a weary traveler passed by, the farmer stopped his work to offer water, while the landowner pulled his curtains closed, pretending not to see. When a neighbor's child fell ill, the farmer shared herbs and food, while the landowner turned away, muttering that he could not waste his supplies. When the village elders gathered to discuss repairs for the irrigation canal, the farmer offered his hands, while the landowner offered only excuses. "I pay my taxes," he said coldly. "That is enough." But everyone knew that his wealth had never been shared in a way that truly helped others. Despite all this, the landowner convinced himself he was wise. "Look at the farmer," he thought, watching his neighbor give away rice to a beggar. "He has little and gives it away. He is a fool. One day he will have nothing, and then he will see that kindness does not fill a stomach. I, however, will always have enough. I am strong because I do not waste." Yet what he called strength was only fear dressed in pride. What he called wisdom was only greed whispering lies. His greed shaped not only his actions, but also his inner world. He slept lightly, waking at every sound, fearing thieves. He dreamed of losing his barns, of fields drying up, of coins slipping through his fingers like sand. Each morning, his eyes were heavy, his face lined not by age, but by worry. His workers noticed how he grew quick to anger, snapping at small mistakes. His neighbors noticed how his laughter never rang in the village, even in festivals, when drums and flutes filled the air, and children danced with joy. He remained in his house, frowning at the noise, guarding his wealth as if joy itself might try to steal from him. There was a time when a poor widow came to him, carrying her sick child. She bowed at his gate and begged for a small measure of rice, enough to keep her child alive until the rains returned. He looked at her, then at his barns filled to the brim, and shook his head. "If I give to you," he said harshly, "then tomorrow others will come, and soon my stores will be gone. Leave." The widow walked away with tears on her face, her child weak in her arms. The landowner returned to his counting, convincing himself he had done the sensible thing. Yet, that night, as the wind rattled his shutters, he heard the faint echo of the child's cry in his dreams. He woke sweating, clutching his chest, though his barns remained full another time. A group of travelers approached, dusty and weary, asking if they could rest under his tree for shade. He ordered them away, fearing they might steal from his land. They moved on, their footsteps slow and heavy. Not long after, storms washed away part of his road, leaving his cart stuck in the mud. The same travelers who could have helped him were far away by then. He cursed his bad luck, never seeing that his own actions had closed the door to assistance. The landowner's life seemed rich too, those who looked only with their eyes, but those who looked with their hearts saw the truth. His riches were like a cage, golden yet confining. He could not see the beauty of the sunrise, for he was busy counting. He could not hear the laughter of children, for he shut his ears against joy. He could not feel the peace of trust, for he lived in suspicion. His world was narrow, made of walls and locks, while just beyond those walls, life unfolded in all its abundance, free and generous. The villagers began to whisper that his wealth was cursed, for though it grew, so too did his unhappiness. Some said he must have done wrong in a past life to be given riches without joy. Others said he was simply blind, unable to see that true wealth was measured not in grain or gold, but in the peace of the heart. Whatever the reason, all agreed that though he was the richest man in the village, he was also the poorest in spirit. As seasons turned, the gap between his life and the farmer's grew wider. The farmer, though never free from hardship, walked with ease, his face lit with quiet contentment. The landowner, though never lacking in goods, walked with heaviness, his brow furrowed with fear. The law of cause and effect, invisible yet unerring, was already weaving their destinies. Each seed of kindness or cruelty, each act of giving or hoarding, was being recorded not by human hands but by the universe itself. And so, while the farmer planted not only rice but goodwill, the landowner planted suspicion and greed. The earth, impartial and patient, would one day return to each man the harvest he had sown. For now, the landowner continued his life of counting, guarding, and fearing, never noticing that the wealth he clung to so tightly was slowly draining the life from his heart. His story was still unfolding, his choices still echoing into the future. Soon, the test of both men's lives would come, and the truth of their paths would be revealed. But until that moment, the landowner sat alone in his grand house, surrounded by gold yet starved of joy, while next door, the farmer's simple home was filled with laughter, warmth, and peace. The rhythm of life in the village moved with the seasons, and the kind farmer continued his days with patience and care, never seeking recognition, never asking for reward. His neighbors often wondered how a man with so little could give so much, and yet, if one looked closely, the answer was hidden in the smallest of his daily gestures, for his life was not made of grand deeds or dramatic sacrifices, but of countless seeds of kindness, planted quietly, almost invisibly, in the soil of human hearts. Each morning, as the mist still clung to the fields and the dew shimmered on the leaves, the farmer would step outside to begin his work. He carried with him not only tools for the earth, but also a spirit of gentle attention. When he passed by the old banyan tree, he noticed a bird with a broken wing. Without hesitation, he bent down, scooped the fragile creature into his hands, and carried it home. His children gathered around as he placed the bird in a small basket lined with straw. Day by day, he fed it grains and drops of water, speaking softly so it would not fear. Weeks later, when the bird's wing had healed, he opened his hands and watched it fly into the morning sky. His children clapped with joy, and the farmer smiled, saying, "When we help even the smallest being, we share in the freedom of their flight." Another time, as he worked in his field, he noticed an old ox struggling under the heavy load of another villager's cart. The animal's legs trembled, and the man whipped it angrily, cursing its weakness. The farmer set aside his own plough, walked over, and placed his hand on the ox's neck. "This creature has given you many years of service," he said gently. "It is tired, not useless." He helped unload part of the cart, carrying some of the burden himself. The villager grumbled at first, ashamed, but later he bowed his head, realizing the truth in the farmer's words. The ox rested, its breathing slowing, and with lighter weight it was able to continue. The farmer returned to his work without expecting thanks. Yet in that moment he had planted another seed of compassion, one that touched both beast and man. Children in the village often ran barefoot through his fields, chasing butterflies or playing games. Some landowners scolded them for stepping on the plants, but the farmer simply laughed. When he found them hiding among the rows of grain, he showed them how to walk carefully, placing their feet between the shoots. He taught them to cup their hands around young plants, as if holding something precious. "The earth gives us food," he told them, so we must treat it as kindly as we would treat a friend." The children listened, their laughter mixing with his words, and though they were young, they carried the lesson in their hearts. Years later, they would remember that kindness to the earth was as important as kindness to one another. Even in the smallest acts of daily life, the farmer sowed goodness. When he carried water from the well, he filled not only his own jars, but also left a small bowl for stray dogs and cats that wandered by. When he walked through the market, he greeted each vendor by name, asking about their families, offering a coin or two extra when he could. Once, he noticed an old woman struggling to lift a bundle of firewood. Without a word, he took it from her shoulders and carried it to her home. She wept with gratitude, but he only smiled, saying, "We are all travelers carrying burdens. Today, I carry yours. Tomorrow, someone may carry mine." The seeds he planted were not always visible at once, but they rippled through the village like unseen currents. A traveler who once received food from his hands told others of the generous farmer. A child who learned gentleness in his field grew into an adult who treated his own workers with respect. The ox he defended lived longer, and its strength continued to feed another family. None of these things were recorded in books or carved in stone, yet they wove together a tapestry of kindness that shaped the lives of many. The farmer himself did not dwell on these things. To him, kindness was as natural as breathing. When his wife asked why he never kept more for their family, he answered softly, "What we share does not diminish us. A candle loses nothing by lighting another flame. In giving, we do not become poorer, we become brighter." His children, listening quietly, absorbed the truth of his words more deeply than any lecture could have taught. Seasons passed, and with them came both hardship and joy. In one year, the rains were heavy, and the river flooded, sweeping away parts of the village road. Many families were trapped, unable to carry their goods to market. The farmer, though his own fields were damaged, gathered neighbors and worked with them to rebuild the path. He lent his oxen to pull stones, and when others grew weary, he encouraged them with patient words. By the end of the week, the road was passable again, and the village could breathe in relief. The elders praised his leadership, but he only bowed and said, "We built it together. The road belongs to all." In another year, sickness spread through the village. People coughed at night, and fevers burned through homes. The farmer's wife fell ill, and though he feared for her, he did not close his doors to others. When neighbors knocked, asking for help, he shared herbs from his garden, boiling them into simple medicines. He sat with the sick, wiping their brows, whispering words of comfort. Some survived, some did not, but all felt his presence as a light in their darkest nights. Even grief, when it came, was softened by the knowledge that love had not been withheld. His acts were not always dramatic, often so small they might be overlooked by eyes seeking grandeur. But in the quiet spaces of daily life, he left behind countless traces of warmth. A smile to a stranger, a kind word to a child, a patient gesture to a tired animal. These were the seeds he scattered. The world might forget great kings and conquerors, but the hearts touched by such small kindnesses never forget the feeling of being cared for. And while he never sought reward, the universe listened. For every seed planted, there would one day be a harvest. The farmer did not know when or how, but the gentle law of cause and effect was already at work, carrying forward the goodness he had given, like rain soaking into soil, unseen but nourishing. His deeds watered the roots of a future he could not yet imagine. Meanwhile, The greedy neighbor watched all of this with disdain. To him, the farmer's kindness was wasteful, a sign of weakness. "Look at him," the landowner muttered, "giving food to strangers, helping animals, wasting time on children. What does he gain from this? Nothing but tired arms and an empty stomach." Yet what he could not see was the invisible wealth, gathering around the farmer, the trust of his neighbors, the loyalty of friends, the peace in his own heart. These treasures could not be stolen or lost to storms. They grew quietly, like a hidden garden blooming behind closed gates. The villagers, though polite to the landowner, knew in their hearts where true wealth lay. When they spoke of the farmer, they used words like gentle, dependable, and kind. When they spoke of the landowner, they used words like harsh, proud, and fearful. Though the farmer's house was smaller, it was filled with laughter. Though the landowner's barns were larger, they echoed with silence. The difference was clear, though the landowner himself remained blind to it, and so the days unfolded, each one carrying the farmer's seeds farther into the world. The bird he healed now soared above the fields, singing a song that lifted hearts. The children he guided grew into kind adults. The widow he once gave food to found strength to raise her child, who in turn grew up remembering the kindness of a stranger. The ripple spread, unseen but unstoppable, touching shores far beyond what the farmer himself could reach. For kindness, once planted, does not end. It flows, multiplies, and returns, often when least expected. The farmer understood this, not as a doctrine to be recited, but as a truth he lived with every breath. His life was proof that even the smallest seeds, scattered gently and without expectation, could one day become forests of compassion. And though the harvest of his deeds had not yet arrived, it was already taking shape in the unseen fabric of the world, waiting for the right season to reveal itself. In the quiet village, where fields of rice swayed gently with the seasons, the life of the greedy landowner unfolded like a shadow beside the light of the kind farmer. Just as the farmer's days were marked by small seeds of kindness, the landowner's life was woven with threads of suspicion, selfishness, and fear. His barn stood tall, filled to the brim with grain. His house loomed large with polished wood and decorated walls. Yet within those walls there was no warmth, no laughter, no peace. What he had gathered with such fervor seemed only to deepen the emptiness in his heart. Each morning, when the mist still lay over the fields and the air carried the fresh promise of a new day, the landowner did not step outside to greet the earth or whisper thanks for life. Instead, he sat at a heavy wooden table with a ledger open before him. His eyes scanned numbers, his lips muttered calculations. How many sacks of rice had been stored? How many coins had been gained from the market? How much did his workers cost him, and how much could he save if he dismissed one or two? For him, dawn was not a moment of gratitude, but of counting. The song of birds was drowned by the sound of coins clinking as he stacked them, checked them, and hid them away in locked chests. His workers felt the weight of his greed each day. They arrived early, bending their backs in the hot sun, but instead of encouragement, they were met with sharp commands. If a man paused to wipe sweat from his brow, the landowner shouted at him for wasting time. If a woman asked for more rice to feed her children, he accused her of laziness. He watched them with suspicion, convinced they were plotting to steal from him. The harder they worked, the more he demanded, for he believed that wealth was not grown by cooperation but by squeezing every drop of labor from others. His fields yielded plenty, but the people who toiled upon them felt no gratitude, only resentment. Animals too, suffered under his care. His oxen were forced to pull heavy loads far beyond their strength. When they slowed, he whipped them without mercy, his eyes blind to their pain. Chickens and goats were kept crowded and hungry, their cries echoing through the night. The landowner thought of them not as living beings, but as machines to serve his profit. Yet the universe, quiet but unfailing, keeps balance. The oxen grew weak sooner than they should have, leaving his carts stranded. The goats became sickly, their milk drying up. The chickens, thin and restless, laid fewer eggs. He cursed his bad fortune, never realizing that his own cruelty had planted the seeds of loss. The villagers spoke of him with hushed voices. They noticed how his barns were full, yet his spirit was empty. They saw how he drove away beggars, how he turned from the sick, how he mocked the farmer next door for sharing. At first, some envied his riches, but over time, envy turned to pity, for they saw that wealth had chained him rather than freed him. Children avoided his gate, for his eyes frightened them. Travelers whispered warnings about his harshness, choosing instead to rest under the farmer's tree, where water and kindness were freely given. The landowner, however, convinced himself that he was clever, that he was stronger and wiser than those who wasted their resources on others. Night. When families gathered together to share simple meals and tell stories by the fire, his house remained silent. He ate alone, his servants fearful and quiet in his presence. When laughter drifted from the farmer's home, the landowner scowled, muttering that joy was for fools. Yet when he lay in bed, he could not sleep. His mind raced with thoughts of thieves, of bad harvests, of rivals plotting against him. He locked his doors, then rose again to check the locks. Then once more, before finally lying down with coins hidden under his pillow. But sleep rarely came, and when it did, it brought dreams of loss, of barns collapsing, of gold turning to dust in his hands. He woke in sweat, clutching at the chest beside his bed, relieved to find the coins still there, yet never free from the fear of losing them. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of red, a beggar woman with a child in her arms came to his gate. Her clothes were torn, her eyes hollow with hunger. She bowed deeply and whispered, "Please, sir, just a handful of rice. My child has not eaten in days." The landowner looked at her, then at his barns overflowing with grain. His heart hardened. "If I give to you," he snapped, "tomorrow 10 more will come, and soon I will have nothing." "Go away," the woman pleaded, but his guards drove her off. That night, the child's faint cries echoed in his dreams. He woke gasping, but instead of compassion, he felt only irritation. He convinced himself he had done the sensible thing, that kindness was weakness. Yet the unease in his heart lingered, a shadow he could not shake another time. A group of weary merchants passed along the road. They paused beneath his tree for shade, their faces pale from the long journey. Fearing they might steal from his land, he ordered them away, his voice sharp and cruel. They left silently, carrying their burdens onward. Days later, when floods washed out part of his road, his carts were trapped in the mud. He needed strong arms to help, but none came. The merchants, who might have aided him, were far away, and his workers, treated with harshness, offered little effort beyond what was required. He cursed his bad fortune again, never seeing that his own suspicion had closed the door to help. The truth of his life was this: though his house was filled with riches, his heart was filled with fear. Though his barns overflowed with grain, his nights were empty of peace. Though he had power over others, He had no control over his restless mind. His greed cast a shadow not only over his land but over his very soul. He lived as though the world were his enemy, as though every hand was reaching to take what was his. In guarding his wealth, he lost the greater treasures of trust, friendship, and joy. The contrast between him and the farmer became a lesson the villagers could not ignore. They saw one man with little, yet surrounded by friends, peace, and laughter. They saw another with much, yet surrounded by locks, suspicion, and silence. Slowly, their respect shifted. When they sought advice, they went to the farmer. When they sought comfort, they turned to his family. The landowner remained isolated, his wealth unable to buy the love or trust of others. Time, patient and impartial, was watching. Each act of cruelty, each moment of greed was a seed, just as every act of kindness planted by the farmer was a seed. The earth, like an honest mirror, would one day return to each man what he had given. The landowner believed himself strong, but his strength was hollow. His wealth was a fortress with walls that crumbled from within. He could not see it yet, but the season of harvest was drawing near. And when it came, the shadows of his greed would bear fruit as surely as the farmer's kindness would. For the law of cause and effect waits for no man, rich or poor. It moves silently, patiently, and when the time is right, it reveals the truth that cannot be denied. And so the landowner continued, blind to the seeds he was planting, deaf to the warnings whispered by his own restless heart. His barns grew fuller, but his spirit grew emptier. His neighbors turned away, his workers labored without loyalty, his nights brought no rest. Yet still he clung to his gold, believing it was his shield, never realizing that it was his chain. The seasons had rolled on in their steady rhythm, as they always had. Rains had come and gone, the fields had turned green, then golden, then brown again in their endless cycle of growth and rest. For years the village lived in this natural harmony, and people came to trust that no matter how difficult one season might be, the next would bring balance. Yet life, like the river, does not always flow smoothly. There are times when the earth holds back her gifts, and the sky remains silent. It was during one such time that the village faced a trial unlike any it had known before. At first, it was subtle. The rains that usually came in the early summer were late. The villagers waited, glancing at the sky each evening, hoping for the soft grey clouds that promised water. Instead, the sun blazed fiercely, day after day, without rest. The streams that once trickled through the fields grew thin, their beds cracking with dryness. The leaves on the trees curled, and the once green fields turned pale, as though losing their strength to stand against the relentless heat. The children stopped chasing each other in the dusty lanes, too weary in the heavy air. The animals searched for shade, panting under the cruel sun. The kind farmer watched his fields with quiet concern. Each morning, he walked the rows of rice, speaking softly to the plants, as if to encourage them. He carried buckets of water from the well, sprinkling what little he could spare, though he knew it was not enough. His oxen grew thinner, their ribs showing, yet he still fed them the best of what he had, saving scraps for himself. When his children asked why the rains did not come, he explained gently, the earth has its own rhythm. Sometimes she gives freely, sometimes she rests. We must be patient. The landowner, on the other hand, grew restless and angry. He stormed through his barns, counting his sacks of grain again and again, though none had disappeared. He shouted at his workers to bring more water, to dig deeper into the earth, to find what was not there. When the wells began to dry, he accused them of laziness, refusing to believe that even their strongest efforts could not summon the rains. Each day, as the sun beat down, his temper grew shorter. He cursed the sky, cursed the soil, cursed even the farmer, whose calmness seemed to mock his own despair. Weeks turned into months, and still the rain did not fall. The earth split open in long cracks, as though groaning under the burden of thirst. The villagers grew thin, their stores of food dwindling. Mothers gave their bowls to their children, eating little themselves. The animals in the fields staggered, too weak to work, and some lay down, never to rise again. The sound of crying filled the nights, mixing with the dry whisper of the wind in these hard times. The difference between the farmer and the landowner grew even clearer. The farmer, though his family also suffered hunger, continued to share. When a neighbor's child came to him with hollow eyes, he gave a handful of rice, even if it meant less for his own children. He gathered with others to pool what little food remained, encouraging them to help one another. His words were steady. If we stand together, we can endure. Alone, we will fall. And though the portions were small, the spirit of unity gave strength to weary hearts. The landowner, however, locked his barns tighter. He posted guards to keep villagers from approaching, for he feared they might beg or steal. When his workers, too weak to labor, asked for more food, he dismissed them, saying he would not waste his stores on idlers. His house remained full of grain, yet empty of compassion. As hunger deepened, he paced through his halls like a prisoner, clutching his keys, hearing in every sound the imagined footsteps of thieves. He ate alone, suspicious even of his servants, tasting bitterness in every bite. The trial grew harsher as the months dragged on. The riverbeds dried completely, leaving only stones. Dust storms swept through the fields, covering crops and homes alike. The air itself seemed heavy with despair. Some villagers left in search of better lands, their figures disappearing into the horizon, though few returned. Those who remained clung to each other, surviving on roots, scraps, and whatever kindness they could find. The farmer's family grew thin, but their faces held quiet courage, for they still had one another. The landowner's wealth kept his body fed, but his eyes grew hollow, for no wealth could feed the hunger of a fearful heart. One night, as the moon rose pale above the dry earth, the farmer gathered his children and wife beneath the banyan tree. They sat close together, listening to the wind. His children asked, "Father, will the rain ever come back?" He placed his hand on the earth and said, "The earth is like us. She has times of abundance and times of weariness. The rain will come when she is ready. Until then, we must hold each other with patience and kindness. That is how we survive." His wife, though weary, smiled at his words, finding comfort in his calmness. The children, though hungry, leaned against him and fell asleep in his arms. In the landowner's house, the night was restless. He paced before his barns, lantern in hand, checking the locks again and again. Though his stores were full, he could not find peace. He feared the villagers might come in desperation, feared thieves might strike in the darkness, feared that his barns might rot before the drought ended. His servants, thin and weak, whispered of leaving, for they no longer trusted a man who hoarded while others starved. The landowner shouted at them, his voice echoing through the empty halls. Yet inside he was trembling, a prisoner of his own fear. The drought was not merely a test of the earth. It was a test of hearts. For in times of abundance, generosity is easy, and patience costs little. But in times of scarcity, when hunger gnaws at the belly and thirst dries the throat, true character is revealed. The farmer, though hungry, shared what little he had, planting invisible seeds of compassion that would one day bloom. The landowner, though wealthy, closed his fists tighter, planting seeds of bitterness that were already bearing fruit in the form of isolation and distrust. The villagers saw this with their own eyes. They began to whisper, not of envy for the landowner's wealth, but of admiration for the farmer's spirit. They said, "He has little, yet he gives. He suffers, yet he comforts. His home is small, yet it is filled with light." And of the landowner, they said, "He has much, yet he gives nothing. He eats, yet he hungers. His house is large, yet it is filled with shadows." The trial of drought had become more than a struggle for survival. It had become a mirror, showing the true wealth and poverty of each man. As the days stretched on, the sky finally began to change. A faint coolness entered the air, a breeze carrying whispers of rain. Clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and heavy with promise. The villagers lifted their faces, hope flickering in their eyes for the first time in many months. The farmer looked to the sky, his hands clasped in gratitude. The landowner looked too, but his thoughts were not of thanks. They were of how to guard his wealth once the rains restored the fields. The trial had not yet ended, but its lesson was already clear. The earth had shown that hardship strips away illusions, leaving only truth. And the truth was this: the farmer's wealth lay not in his barns, but in his heart. The landowner's poverty lay not in his lack, but in his fear. The rains would come, the fields would bloom again, but the seeds planted during the drought, kindness and greed, compassion and fear would shape the harvest of both men's lives. The drought had stretched on so long that the villagers had almost forgotten the taste of abundance. Even when the clouds finally gathered and the first drops of rain began to fall, it felt more like a dream than reality. Children ran outside with open mouths, catching the cool water on their tongues, and mothers wept quietly with relief as the earth darkened beneath the falling drops. The dry riverbeds stirred with new streams, and the fields, though scarred, drank deeply. Life was slowly returning, yet the damage of the long trial lingered. Barns were empty, bellies still thin, and many families had little left with which to plant new crops. The kind farmer, though weary and gaunt, stood in his field beneath the gentle rain. His eyes closed as he lifted his face to the sky, whispering thanks for the water that fell. His children danced barefoot in the mud, their laughter ringing out for the first time in many months. His wife gathered pots and jars to catch the rain, smiling as if she had been given treasure more precious than gold. Though the drought was ending, survival still depended on what came next. Seeds had to be sown, tools repaired, and animals nourished. It was a fragile time, where hope balanced on the edge of hardship. It was then that help began to arrive in ways the farmer had not expected. The first came in the form of a group of travelers. They were men he had once helped long ago, when they had passed through his village, weary and thirsty. He had given them water, food, and a place to rest beneath his tree. Now they returned, their carts filled with grain and supplies from distant lands. When they saw the farmer's fields, they remembered his kindness. One of them bowed and said, "We have never forgotten the man who gave to us when we were strangers. In our time of need, your generosity carried us onward. Now we return, and it is our joy to repay that debt." They unloaded sacks of rice, beans, and seeds, placing them in the farmer's humble home. The farmer bowed deeply, his heart swelling with gratitude, not for the food alone, but for the reminder that kindness is never lost. Soon after, another form of help arrived. A widow in the village, whose child the farmer had once fed during a season of scarcity, came to him with tears in her eyes. She carried a small bundle of dried herbs she had gathered. "It is not much," she said softly, "but you once saved my child when we were hungry. Now I offer you what I can." Though the herbs were little, the gesture was immense. The farmer accepted them with respect, knowing that the gift carried the weight of love and gratitude. His wife used the herbs to heal their family's weakened bodies, and the children grew stronger. Even the animals seemed to return the kindness he had shown. His oxen, though tired, had survived the drought because he had given them the best of what little food he had. Now, with the rains falling and the earth soft again, they plowed the fields with renewed energy. Their loyalty was evident in the way they leaned into the harness without complaint, as if they understood the bond that had carried them through hardship together. The farmer stroked their necks and whispered, "We endured side by side. Now we shall rebuild side by side." The neighbors, too, remembered his quiet generosity during the months of hunger. Families he had given rice to, even when his own children went with less, now came to offer their help. One brought tools, another shared labor, another lent animals to help with the heavy work. Soon, the farmer's field was alive with activity, not only his own family, but many hands working together. They rebuilt fences, sowed seeds, and prepared the land for a new season. Where once there had been silence and despair, now there was the hum of cooperation. The strength of community. The landowner, however, faced a different reality. His barns, though once full, had dwindled during the drought. He had hoarded his grain, eating well while others starved, but the endless months had consumed even his vast stores. Worse, the distrust he had sown during the hard times now returned to him. When he looked for workers to help restore his fields, few came. Those he had dismissed in anger during the drought refused to return, remembering his harshness. Neighbors turned away, for he had closed his gates to them when they were in need. Travelers avoided his house, recalling the cruelty with which he had driven them off. He still had land and a large house, but no helping hands, no willing hearts. Alone, he could do little. His oxen, weak from overwork and poor care, stumbled when he tried to force them to the plow. His barns stood in silence, heavy with the emptiness of mistrust. Meanwhile, the farmer's fields, though smaller, began to stir with life. The seeds he planted sprouted quickly, nourished not only by the rain, but by the goodwill of those who helped him. The rows of green shoots seemed to bow in the wind, as though acknowledging the invisible power of kindness that had carried them into being. His children laughed as they watched the plants grow, their hunger slowly easing with each new meal made possible by the supplies from his friends. His wife, though still weary, walked with renewed strength. Her heart lifted by the sight of neighbors working together with them. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with shades of orange and purple, the farmer sat beneath the banyan tree with those who had gathered to help him. They shared a simple meal, rice cooked with the herbs given by the widow, and fruits brought by another neighbor. Laughter filled the air as stories were told, voices mingling like the flowing of a gentle stream. The farmer looked around, his eyes soft with gratitude. He spoke quietly, "When the drought was upon us, I feared we would not endure. But kindness is a seed, and though it may sleep unseen, when the right season comes, it blooms. Tonight, I see the blossoms around me." The villagers nodded, for they, too, felt the truth of his words. In contrast, the landowner sat alone in his great house. He lit his lamps, but their glow only deepened the shadows on the walls. His servants had thinned, many leaving in search of kinder masters. His fields lay untended, his animals frail. He muttered to himself, "Why does no one come? Why does no one help me?" Yet in his heart, he knew the answer. The seeds he had planted were bearing their fruit. Suspicion, harshness, and greed had ripened into isolation, where the farmer's kindness drew help from far and wide. His own cruelty had driven it away. As the rains continued and the village slowly healed, the farmer's home became a place of gathering, a beacon of warmth and unity. Children played in his yard, elders came to share wisdom, travelers stopped to rest and give blessings. His simple home, though never rich in possessions, was overflowing with abundance of a different kind, the abundance of love, trust, and community. The help he received had come unexpectedly, but in truth, it was the natural return of the kindness he had long given. The law of cause and effect, patient and impartial, had revealed its gentle justice. The lesson was clear to all who watched. No act of kindness is ever wasted. A drop of water given in compassion may return as a river in times of need. A handful of rice shared in generosity may return as a harvest of plenty. The farmer had lived with this truth in his heart, and now he saw it unfold before his eyes. The landowner too saw the law at work, though its lesson was bitter. He learned that no amount of gold can summon friends, and no wealth can buy trust once it has been lost. His barns, once his pride, now mocked him with their emptiness, for they held no warmth, no laughter, no love. And so, as the village entered a new season, the story of the two men grew into a tale told at firesides and whispered to children before sleep. One man planted kindness and reaped help in his darkest hour. The other planted greed and reaped loneliness when he needed others most. The drought had been a great trial, but it was also a great teacher, showing that the seeds we plant in everyday life, whether kindness or cruelty, are the harvests we must one day face. The rains had returned, and the village once again breathed with life. Fields that had lain cracked and barren now shimmered with tender shoots of green. Streams trickled through the valleys, carrying with them the music of renewal. For many, it was a time of gratitude and rebuilding, a time to plant not only seeds in the soil but also hope in their hearts. Yet for the landowner, whose barns once towered over the village like monuments of pride, this season revealed a different harvest, the bitter fruits of his greed. At first, he thought the worst had passed. When the first rain fell, he told himself that his wealth would soon grow again. He ordered his weakened oxen to plow, shouting as he always had, ignoring their trembling legs. The animals stumbled, unable to bear the weight, and one collapsed, never rising again. The landowner struck the earth in anger, cursing his misfortune, yet never seeing that his own cruelty had broken the very creatures upon which his prosperity depended. Without their strength, his vast fields remained untilled. Patches of land that once yielded abundance, now lying idle under the open sky. He turned to his workers, demanding that they double their efforts to make up for lost time. But the workers, thin from months of neglect and bitter from years of harshness, looked at him with hollow eyes. One by one, they left, seeking work with neighbors who treated them with respect. Some joined the kind farmer who, despite his smaller land, welcomed them with patience and gratitude. Others moved to distant villages where their labor would be valued. The landowner shouted after them, threatening, calling them ungrateful, but his words carried no weight. They had endured his cruelty long enough, and no fear remained to bind them to his service. His barns, once overflowing, now echoed with emptiness. The grain he had hoarded during the drought was nearly gone, eaten by himself and wasted by rats that had slipped through cracks. He tried to bargain with merchants passing through, offering coins for new supplies, but they shook their heads. "We remember how you drove us away when we sought shade," they said. "Why should we trade with a man who showed no compassion?" Others raised their prices so high that even his gold seemed worthless. In his desperation, he opened chests of coins, their shine glinting in the lamplight. But when he reached for food in his storerooms, there was little left. His wealth, once his shield, now mocked him, for it could not fill his stomach, nor ease the ache of hunger that grew each day. The villagers, too, turned their faces from him. During the drought, when their children starved, he had locked his gates and hoarded his grain. Now, when he approached them asking for help, they shook their heads. "You would not share when we were hungry," they said. "Why should we share now?" His pleas fell upon ears hardened by his own selfishness. He wandered the lanes of the village, his fine clothes dusty, his voice hoarse from anger, but no door opened to him. His large house, once a symbol of power, now stood as a lonely monument to a life built on greed. Each night he paced within his halls, his footsteps echoing in the silence. His servants had dwindled to a handful, their loyalty fragile, their eyes filled with fear of abandonment. He lit his lamps, but the light only deepened the shadows, reminding him of what he had lost. He dreamed of feasts, of laughter, of trust, but woke to the cold reality of solitude. His wealth was still there, scattered in coins and ornaments, yet it brought him no comfort. He realized with a shudder that gold cannot cook a meal, coins cannot till a field, jewels cannot offer friendship. The greatest blow came when sickness entered his home. His body, weakened by restless nights and bitter worry, succumbed to fever. He called for help, but no healer came. Those who might once have aided him turned away, remembering how he had refused them in their hour of need. His servants, frightened, did what little they could, but their knowledge was small. He lay upon his bed, sweating, trembling, and in the quiet of those nights, the truth began to press upon him. For the first time, he saw clearly the shadow he had lived within, the prison he had built from greed. Images came to him in his fever faces of beggars he had turned away, children whose cries he had ignored, workers he had whipped with harsh words, travelers he had driven from his tree. Their eyes looked at him, not with hatred, but with sorrow, as if asking why he had chosen such a path. He tried to close his eyes, but the images returned, wave after wave. He realized then that his wealth had not been lost to misfortune. It had been drained away by the seeds of cruelty he himself had planted. The drought had not been his enemy, nor the villagers, nor fate itself. His enemy had been his own heart, hardened by greed until nothing remained but fear and loneliness. Meanwhile, beyond his walls, life stirred with renewal. The farmer's fields, tended with patience and aided by neighbors, grew strong and green. Laughter returned to the village, children ran once more through the lanes, and songs rose in the evenings. The landowner heard these sounds from afar, and each note pierced him like a reminder of what he had never known. His barns remained empty, his fields silent, his halls echoing with absence. The contrast between his life and the farmer's shone brighter than the sun itself. a truth the universe revealed with gentle but undeniable clarity. As his strength weakened, the landowner sat one evening by his window, looking out at the horizon where the fields shimmered with life. He whispered to himself, "All this time I thought wealth was found in barns and coins, but I see now it is found in hearts. I am the poorest man in this village." His voice broke, and for the first time in many years, tears filled his eyes. The fall of the greedy was not marked by a dramatic collapse, but by a slow unraveling, as one by one, the supports he trusted, his animals, his workers, his neighbors, his wealth slipped away, leaving him exposed to the truth. The seeds he had planted had ripened, and the harvest was his to bear. Alone, weakened, and filled with regret, he finally began to understand the law that had always been at work. The universe had not punished him with cruelty. It had simply reflected his own choices. Greed had been his teacher, showing him the emptiness of selfishness. Loneliness had been his companion, showing him the cost of mistrust. Hunger and sickness had been his mirrors, showing him the futility of hoarded wealth. In his fall, he glimpsed the truth that the farmer had always known. Kindness is the only wealth that grows when shared, and greed is the only poverty that deepens when clung to. And so, as the village thrived and his own house grew silent, the landowner tasted the bitter fruit of his actions. Yet even in his fall, the possibility of change flickered faintly, like a candle struggling against the wind. For the law of cause and effect is not only a mirror of justice, but also a guide toward awakening. If he could see clearly, if he could truly repent, perhaps new seeds could yet be planted. But for now, the fall was complete, and the shadows of his greed stretched long, a warning to all who witnessed his fate. The days in the village grew gentler as the rains returned, and the land healed itself with quiet determination. Seeds sprouted into young shoots, and the air carried once more the fragrance of wet earth and new growth. Children laughed again, mothers hummed as they worked, and men sang songs as they tilled the softened soil. It was as though life, long asleep under the weight of drought, had awakened with renewed vigor. Yet within the large, silent house of the landowner, there was no laughter, no song, no fragrance of joy, only the sound of a man facing the emptiness he himself had sown. The landowner had fallen ill. His body, weakened by months of restless nights and heavy worry, could no longer hide the toll his life had taken. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, his breath shallow, his lips dry. His servants had dwindled to just a few, their loyalty not born of affection but of obligation, and even they whispered of leaving, for they sensed their master had nothing left to give. Alone in the heavy silence, the landowner began to see his life with a clarity that had always eluded him. When he closed his eyes, memories rose like ghosts. He saw the beggar woman clutching her starving child, pleading for just a handful of rice. He saw himself turning her away, his face hard, his voice cruel. He saw the travelers beneath his tree, weary and sunburnt, and heard again his own words as he ordered them to leave, fearing they might take from him what he believed was his alone. He saw his workers bending under the weight of heavy loads, their eyes dull with exhaustion, and remembered how he had scolded them for weakness instead of offering compassion. These visions did not accuse him with anger. They stood before him with silent sorrow, a mirror reflecting his own hardness. At first he tried to resist. He told himself he had been wise, that he had been strong, that he had only done what was necessary to protect his wealth. But the arguments rang hollow in the stillness of his sick. No voice answered him, No hand reached for his in reassurance. His gold lay locked in chests, but none of it could ease his pain. None of it could comfort him in the night. For the first time, he realized that his coins were nothing but cold metal, and his barns, once overflowing, were nothing but empty shells. His heart, long closed, was finally beginning to open. Not from wisdom freely chosen, but from suffering that could no longer be denied. One evening, as the sun cast long shadows across the land, he asked a servant to open his window. From his bed, he could see the farmer's fields. They were alive with movement, neighbors working together, children running, laughter rising like music. The sight pierced him with both envy and longing. He whispered, almost to himself, "Why is it that he, who has so little, is surrounded by so much joy, while I, with all my riches, am left alone?" The question echoed in his heart, and slowly, painfully, the answer began to form. It was not wealth that had brought joy to the farmer, but kindness. It was not abundance of possessions, but abundance of compassion. That night, he could not sleep. He thought of the farmer next door, remembered the times he had mocked him for giving too much, for wasting his strength on strangers. He saw now that the farmer had been planting seeds all along, seeds of goodwill, of trust, of love. The drought had tested those seeds, and when the time came, they had blossomed into aid, friendship, and resilience. His own seeds, planted in suspicion and cruelty, had yielded only loneliness and despair. The truth was as sharp as it was undeniable. He was reaping exactly what he had sown. Tears came to his eyes, hot and bitter. For years he had hardened himself against such weakness, telling himself that tears were for the poor, for the foolish, for those without strength. But now he saw that his refusal to weep had been his greatest weakness. For tears are the water of the heart, softening the soil so that new seeds can grow. As they fell upon his pillow, he whispered, "I have been blind. I have been deaf. I have been a fool." The following morning, with trembling hands, he asked his servant to call for the farmer. The servant, surprised, hesitated, but obeyed. When the farmer arrived, he entered the grand house quietly, carrying with him the same calm presence that had always marked his life. He stood by the landowner's bed, his face gentle, his eyes without judgment. The landowner, ashamed, could not meet his gaze at first. Finally, he whispered, "I mocked you for your kindness. I called you a fool, but now I see that I was the fool. My barns are empty, my house silent, my heart broken. You, who had little, now have everything. I, who had much, now have nothing. Tell me, is there any path left for me?" The farmer sat beside him and placed a hand on his arm. His voice was soft, like the murmur of a stream. "As long as there is breath, there is a path. The law of cause and effect is not only a mirror of what we have done, it is also a teacher, showing us how to begin again. You have suffered because you planted seeds of greed, but suffering itself can awaken the heart. If you now plant seeds of kindness, the harvest will come in time. No man is beyond change." The landowner wept again, this time not from despair, but from the first stirrings of release. "But I have wasted so many years," he said. The farmer replied, "The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. Begin where you are. Do what you can." From that day, a small transformation began. Though weak in body, the landowner asked that the last of his stored coins be used to buy food for the poorest families. He instructed his servants to open his gates, allowing travelers to rest beneath his tree. He called back some of his workers and, with trembling humility, apologized for his harshness. Many were skeptical at first, but when they saw the sincerity in his eyes, some returned, not out of fear but out of compassion for a man who had finally seen his own mistakes. The change did not erase his past, nor did it instantly heal the wounds he had caused, but it marked the beginning of something new, a tender sprout pushing through hard soil. The villagers, watching, were astonished. They spoke quietly of how suffering had broken his pride and opened his heart. Some forgave him quickly, others took longer, but all saw that the law of karma, though firm, was not cruel. It had brought him to his knees, not to destroy him, but to awaken him. In his weakness, the landowner learned the strength of humility. In his loneliness, he discovered the value of compassion. In his suffering, he saw the truth that greed can never satisfy, that wealth without kindness is a prison, and that true riches are found only in love shared with others. His awakening was not a sudden blaze of light, but a slow, steady dawn, fragile yet undeniable dot. And so the landowner, once feared and despised, began to change. He walked a new path, one of repentance and renewal. The farmer, ever patient, walked beside him as a quiet guide, reminding him that even the deepest wounds can heal if tended with care. The law of cause and effect had shown its justice, but also its mercy, for in suffering there was still the seed of awakening. The village was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that comes not from emptiness but from peace. The rains had passed, leaving the air cool and clean, the fields washed in silver light as the moon rose above the hills. Families gathered in their homes, children curled against their mothers, elders speaking softly of the past. In the farmer's modest house, the warmth of simple lamps glowed, casting gentle shadows against the walls. Next door, in the landowner's grand house, a different kind of light flickered faint, unsteady yet genuine. It was the light of a man who, through the long road of suffering, had begun to awaken. The landowner was no longer the same man who had once paced his halls in fear, clutching at keys and coins. His body was thinner, his voice softer, his eyes carrying the weight of all he had learned. He spent his days now not in counting grain or polishing wealth, but in small acts of giving. Each morning, he sat beneath the banyan tree where once he had driven strangers away. Now he kept a clay pot of water there, refilling it throughout the day, so that travelers and neighbors might drink. Some who passed were surprised to see him there, his once proud figure bowed in humility. Yet those who drank from the pot left with blessings on their lips when he walked through the village. He no longer carried himself with arrogance. He bowed his head to the elders, greeted the children with a smile, and listened patiently to the concerns of the poor. There were still those who distrusted him, who remembered the long years of cruelty, but even they could not deny that something within him had shifted. His wealth, though diminished, was now used to rebuild what had been broken. He gave tools to those whose homes had collapsed in the floods, seed grain to families whose fields were bare, medicine to those whose bodies still carried the marks of the drought. Each gift was a stone laid upon the path of his redemption. The farmer, watching quietly, offered neither praise nor criticism. He understood that change, like a seed, must be tended slowly. He helped where he could, not by guiding the landowner's every step, but by walking beside him as a silent example. When villagers spoke with suspicion, the farmer said gently, "The heart, too, can be tilled. Even dry soil, if watered, can bloom again." His words softened many hearts, and little by little, The landowner's efforts were met with cautious trust. As weeks turned into months, the landowner found a peace he had never known before. At first, it was strange to him, almost uncomfortable, for he had spent so many years feeding only his greed. But now, when he gave, he felt a warmth that lingered far longer than the cold pleasure of coins. When he shared food with a hungry child, his heart lightened. When he bowed in apology to a worker he had once mistreated, he felt the heaviness in his chest ease. He began to understand that wealth had never been in his barns or chests. It had always been in the connections between hearts. The villagers, too, began to learn from the story of the two men. Parents told their children of the farmer's steadfast kindness and the landowner's painful awakening. They said, "Do not wait until suffering comes to open your heart. Plant seeds of goodness now, for the harvest will surely come, around fires at night." Elders recited the tale as both a warning and a promise. A warning that greed leads only to loneliness, and a promise that kindness always returns, even if slowly, even if unseen. One evening, the landowner came to sit with the farmer beneath the banyan tree. The moon was bright, and the fields shimmered like silver waves. For a while, they said nothing, simply listening to the night sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the gentle flow of water in the canal. At last, the landowner spoke. "I spent my life believing I was rich, but I was poorer than any beggar. Now I see that true wealth is measured not in barns, but in the hearts of others. I cannot change all that I have done, but I can choose what I do now. And so I will spend whatever days remain to me planting the seeds I once ignored." The farmer nodded, his eyes warm with quiet approval. "The law of cause and effect is gentle, though firm," he said. "It gives back to us what we give to the world. For years you sowed shadows, and you walked in shadows. Now you sow light, and already you see the first glimmers. Remember, every day is a chance to plant anew." In the months that followed, the landowner continued his path of change. He sold ornaments and coins he once clung to and used the money to build a shelter for travelers. He offered land for a small communal garden where widows and orphans could grow food. He no longer called himself master over others, but a servant of the same earth that sustained them all. His grand house, once a place of silence and fear, became a gathering place filled with conversation and song. The villagers, who had once spoken of him with bitterness, now began to speak of him with respect, not for the wealth he still possessed, but for the humility he had learned. And so the story of the two men came full circle. The farmer, who had always lived by kindness, continued to walk his steady path, planting seeds of love with each gesture. The landowner, who had once lived in greed, now learned to plant seeds of compassion, even if late. The law of karma had revealed its truth, that we cannot escape the fruits of what we sow. But neither are we bound forever to the mistakes of the past. Every moment is a seed, and the harvest is shaped by what we choose to plant. The eternal lesson whispered through the village, carried on the wind, written in the fields, echoed in the hearts of young and old alike. Kindness is never wasted. Greed never prospers, and the universe, patient and impartial, always returns to us the shape of our own actions. To give is to grow. To cling is to wither. To open the heart is to find wealth no thief can steal, no drought can destroy, no time can diminish. As the years passed, the story of the farmer and the landowner was told again and again. Children listened with wide eyes, learning that their smallest choices mattered, travelers carried the tale to distant lands, reminding strangers of the gentle law that governs all. And under the same moon that had watched them through trial and triumph, the village flourished it not in gold or riches, but in peace, trust, and love. And so, in the stillness of night, when the world is quiet and the heart seeks rest, the eternal lesson remains. Plant seeds of kindness wherever you walk, and in time you will rest beneath the shade of their trees. For in the great garden of life, we harvest only what we sow, and those who sow love will always find themselves surrounded by its blossoms. As the story of the kind farmer and the greedy landowner comes to a close, let us sit quietly with the lesson it has offered. The tale may feel like something from a distant past, set in a small village under the watchful gaze of the seasons, yet its truth reaches across time and space. It speaks to us now, in this very moment, as clearly as it spoke to those who first listened long ago. The law of cause and effect is not a mystery hidden in the stars. It is as near as the breath we take, as immediate as the choices we make. Every word, every gesture, every thought is a seed. Some seeds are heavy with greed, anger, and fear. Others are light with compassion, patience, and generosity. Whichever seeds we scatter, the earth receives them without judgment. And in time, the harvest comes not as punishment, not as reward, but simply as the natural unfolding of what has been planted. The kind farmer showed us that even the smallest acts of care ripple outward. A handful of rice given to a hungry child, a bowl of water offered to a weary traveler, a gentle word spoken to a struggling worker. These are not grand gestures, yet they contain within them the power to transform lives. And when the drought arrived, when hardship tested all hearts, those tiny seeds blossomed into a great forest of support. Help arrived not by accident, but because kindness had been quietly stored in the hearts of many. The landowner, too, taught us, though his lesson was bitter. By closing his fists, by guarding his wealth, by hoarding instead of sharing, he planted seeds of loneliness. When the drought came, his barns may have been full at first, but his heart was empty. And so he discovered that riches cannot buy trust, and gold cannot summon compassion. His fall was painful, yet it was also the beginning of awakening. For even in suffering, there is the chance to open the heart, to plant new seeds, and to walk a gentler path. This is the eternal lesson. What we give, we receive. What we withhold, we lose. Life is a garden, and every moment is an opportunity to sow wisely. If we wish for peace, let us plant peace. If we wish for joy, let us plant joy. If we wish for love, let us plant love. And when difficulties come us, they always will, we will find that the harvest of kindness sustains us far more deeply than any store of gold or grain. As you rest now, breathing softly in the quiet of this night, may this story settle in your heart like a seed. May it remind you that even your smallest acts of goodness matter, that no kindness is ever wasted, and that the universe is always listening, always reflecting, always returning to you the shape of your own giving. And if this story has brought you comfort, peace, or gentle reflection, I invite you to continue this journey. There are many more tales, many more teachings, waiting to guide you into rest and wisdom. Subscribe to Buddhism for sleep, and together we will explore stories of compassion, mindfulness, and the timeless truths of the Dharma. Let these gentle words accompany you each night, carrying you toward dreams of kindness, and awakening you each day to live with a softer, more open heart.